morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it might be where you are, and welcome to today's IBM Security Webcast. My name is Ryan Schwartz. I am Product Marketing Manager for IBM Security Guardium. And today's topic is Fearless with Zero Trust, Data Discovery and Classification for Privacy and Security. So we have quite a bit to talk about today from IBM's perspective on Zero Trust and how we intend to address it from the data security perspective. And then certainly one of the big piece of today's presentation is we do have a guest speaker who I'll introduce shortly from OneTouch.io, a partner of ours to talk about data discovery and classification and their perspective on Zero Trust as well. So before we get into that, before we do some of those intros, this is actually the first in a series of webcasts that we'll be holding throughout the next couple of months here around Zero Trust. So today is Fearless with Zero Trust for Data Discovery and Classification. August 25th, we have a webcast around identity and access management to protect remote work. Securing the hybrid cloud comes next in September, date still to be determined, and September 23rd will round us out talking about how to stop threats with complete visibility on an open cloud security platform, so talking about IBM Cloud Pak for Security. See the resources list on this console if you want to register for some more more webinars in this series. Now, going on from here, let's talk a bit about the two speakers today. So I'm joined today by Jesse Sedler, Senior Product Manager for IBM Security, specifically for IBM Security Guardium, and Rick Hedeman, the VP of Channels and Alliances at OneTouch.io. So welcome to both of you. Thanks for joining today. And actually, I believe, Jesse, you'll be kicking us off as we dive into today's presentation. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan, and thank you, folks, for joining. Really appreciate your time and that you're giving us, this opportunity to talk to you about some of the things we're working on from a Zero Trust, data discovery, privacy, security perspective. A lot of good stuff coming up, so we'll jump right in. And also, of course, we encourage you guys to ask questions. This is not for us to just speak at you for 40 minutes or so. Ask questions. We'll address them probably in the end of the presentation, but we would love to hear, what you want to learn, so in the future we can, tailor our content. But also, just if you have any major pressing questions, concerns, whatnot, let us know. We'll address them. And with that, let's get into it. So we know forward-leaning companies are embracing change at an accelerated pace. Resources are being accessed by a growing number of siloed constituents. This includes employees, suppliers, partners, customers, etc., all using multiple devices from distributed and remote locations. They're treating data as a shared resource between users and communities, using AI and analytics to gain untapped value. And they're refactoring their apps to become more modular and containerized in order to move fast and to scale. They're embracing hybrid multi-cloud environments to match the right workload to the right cloud environment for their business in an open way. But the success of all of this change is dependent on one universal, non-negotiable requirement, which we all know is cybersecurity. Why is this? Well, this is really because a company's digital future requires security to deliver trust, privacy, resilience, compliance, and so much other stuff. Their customers demand it, and their reputation depends on it. Security needs to be safeguarded, these key transformations, but we all know how overwhelming that really can be. We also understand from security leaders that they are just stressed, right? They have too much to do. There's too many tools from too many vendors, too much complexity, as we just discussed, too many industry frameworks, processes, compliance mandates, all of which can lead to just too many alerts. You don't have enough people, enough staff to deal with it. It's a challenge working in the world of security, right? And to make matters worse, traditional security programs are still operating in silos. Sure, there are connections between these silos, and it is getting better. It's a good start. But it lacks really the true visibility and situational awareness and context needed to gain the critical insights to advance the business into a stronger security posture, which will also enhance the overall customer experience. Simply put, they need to transform their security program to help transform the business, and they're having to rethink their approach. Many clients are looking to adopt a Zero Trust framework for building a security program based on the principle of least privilege access. A Zero Trust framework offers a clear investment blueprint, but it doesn't come with instructions really on how to apply and customize it so that it addresses the unique needs of your organization, right? And that's the big challenge. When we engage with customers, there's a few things that they're telling us. One is that they want a trusted partner to take work off their plate, right? They have too much work to do, they need help. Two is they want to get more from their existing security investments and not rebuild everything from scratch, right? We all understand that. You spent money on something, you want to get the most out of it. Three is they want to use AI and analytics to reduce the mess of too many alerts, right? There's alert fatigue. There's not enough people to look at all the alerts. You need some way of a machine siphoning things off for you and filtering. And finally, is they want a simple way to establish and drive security into the rest of the business. Right? It just makes sense. Security is integral to design and to really all of our companies. And IBM is really committed to help and to change this reality. So IBM Security is helping organizations overcome their challenges by putting zero trust into action with a modern, open approach to security that aligns with business priorities. With our approach, organizations can implement a security strategy that is both adaptive and continuous. We help customers deliver a security strategy that will speed them up, not slow them down. Our approach really focuses on 4 key security outcomes: align, protect, manage, and modernize. So align your security strategy to your business. Makes sense? Protect the digital users, assets, and their data, which this is the area that we'll concentrate on today, is really the protect, and of course around the data and your assets. Manage defenses against growing threats, and finally, modernize your security with an open, multi-cloud, hybrid platform. So our portfolio of products and services align to these 4 key areas and are backed by decades of investment. To drill a little deeper into the protect outcome, protecting the perimeter is no longer just about protecting your network, right? The perimeter is now anywhere that your sensitive data lives. Zero Trust helps protect your critical data through 4 key actions. Make sure only the right users get only the right access to only the right data for only the right reason, right? If you can do those 4 things, you are sitting in a very healthy position from a security standpoint. Using a zero trust approach with IBM, regardless of how or where you start, helps security teams advance the business forward in a secure, compliant, auditable, and trusted manner. IBM Security's zero trust approach unifies and integrates tools and processes to generate context that wraps security around every user, every device, every connection, every single time. This approach provides organizations with adaptive and continuous protection for users, data, and assets, as well as the ability to proactively manage threats. This outcome-based approach to zero trust gives customers the freedom and flexibility to take the risks that fuel their business growth and build resiliency without risking security. That is the key. Our customers are using zero trust to enable digital transformation in a secure way, implementing zero trust across 4 key use cases to help infuse security across specific business initiatives: preserving customer privacy based on transparent and secured use of data, protecting the hybrid cloud by gaining visibility over your applications and data, no matter where they live, securing the remote workforce by providing users with secure access to all applications using software-defined policies, finally, and reducing the risk of insider threat by securing all devices, even IoT. So today's webinar, we're going to take a closer look at the first use case, data privacy. And a zero trust approach to data privacy and security provides a great blueprint to tackling the growing and increasingly complex challenge of regulatory compliance. So the privacy challenges that we're seeing, right? One is obviously maintaining visibility over vast amounts of data scattered across silos that are vulnerable to breaches. 2 is enabling safe data sharing and cross-border data flow compliance to derive business value from data. And 3 is scaling cross-functional privacy and security processes with automation, orchestration, and interoperable tools. And you can see from those 3 challenges that maps back to a lot of the initial themes that we've talked about. And just to hit on the stats that we have in here, right? So 45% of enterprises have reduced their customer engagement efforts in certain geographic markets due to regulatory complexity. So that's telling us that in these cases, right, privacy regulations are causing our enterprises or causing customers of ours to change the way that they're doing business because it's just hard to abide by those regulations. But if they had better tools and processes around, they could enhance their business and enhance their top line growth, by expanding into new markets. The second point, 42% of respondents choose to protect their privacy online by avoiding organizations or services they don't trust. So again, all of us working in an enterprise or in business, we see this as if we are trustworthy by our customers, they will stick with us. If we are not trustworthy by our customers, they will leave, right? So there's more and more of an emphasis on needing to have strong security and privacy controls so that you can operate wherever you need to operate, but also that your customers trust you. Now, some more data. In this case, data privacy should be a primary, if not the primary, motivation of a zero trust infrastructure. So in a survey that we had run, 72% have started the process of a zero trust project. Nearly all of them, 94%, identified that data and privacy security is a primary motivation to implement zero trust in their organization. That is, resounding. Similarly, many organizations, 37%, have decided to take a security-centric approach to data privacy, prioritizing the security considerations first. Excuse me there. Compliance in 19% of those cases and data classification in 16% round out the top 3 approaches to address data privacy. So, again, that is telling us that there are a lot of areas that folks are looking to invest, but, have to be security-centric, have to be compliance-centric, and data classification and understanding where your data is what will drive everything else in your organization. And that gets us to really one of our guiding principles in terms of discovery and classification, and that is that this is a means to an end, right? Everything that we do as security and privacy practitioners has to reside around the notion that you know where your sensitive data is, and you know where the data that could get your organization fined, lose customers, in trouble, you have a handle on it, right? So we need a set of tools that can tell us quickly, repeatably, accurately, in a scalable manner across all types of data sources exactly where that data is so that you can then take downstream actions, such as the things we're showing on screen, be it data inventory, privacy automation, data subject access rights request fulfillment. I'm sure that's top of mind for everyone on this call. And then even thinking about it from a security standpoint of activity monitoring, encryption, threat detection, right? Breach response activities, SOAR and SIM, all of those things, right? You can cut through some of the alerts and some of the fatigue by really having the enriched context of, is this data sensitive? Should I care if an activity is happening on it? Those insights are incredibly valuable. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Rick to talk a bit about OneTouch.io and how they approached sensitive data discovery and classification.
Thanks, Jesse. Appreciate that. And thanks, everyone, for joining. At a very high level, we're talking about zero trust, and what that really means is connecting individuals with data, ultimately, right, over an infrastructure that we may trust or we may not trust increasingly in a lot of cases. But critical to connecting individuals to data is understanding the data and how you appropriately and efficiently deploy controls. Not all data is created equally, and you can't afford to protect all that data equally. So OneTouch.io, Inventa is the product name, is focused on identifying that data and organizing it in a way that you can apply those controls and effectively manage your risk. Just a few things about what we do that are key. One is that we don't assume that you know where all of your data is. And this sounds kind of obvious, but in a lot of cases, you actually have to tell your discovery and classification capabilities where to look for the data. The analogy I like to use is you wouldn't tell your antivirus where to look for viruses. We don't think you should have to tell your discovery solution where to look for data. The second one, and Jesse sort of highlighted this, particularly as it relates to privacy, traditional security data classification and discovery approaches don't really organize the data around data subjects, around the individuals. It's typically organized around data elements, and that's a very big difference and a big challenge from a privacy standpoint, and it provides interesting value as it relates to risk management and security of the data. And then ultimately, you're responsible for the data both in a structured format, but but also as it flows downstream into semi-structured and unstructured data repositories, whether that's a report or a transaction or a PDF, the data tends to sprawl about. So if you think about how this has traditionally been done, and data discovery is nothing new. People have been doing it for a long time. The question from a zero trust standpoint is, all right, who are you dependent on? Who do you trust? What do you trust? And how is that working today? So what we typically have seen is, the traditional approach is you've got data owners that are surveyed, you've got perhaps application owners who are surveyed, what data are you storing, where is it, what does it look like, what's sensitive. The challenge with that is this is not their primary job description and can take a long time to actually get back to, and the value of that data is questionable, particularly as we've got an increasing number of legacy kinds of applications out there. Maybe the people who develop the applications have no idea, they're long gone, so that can be a real challenge. So we've applied sort of, some automation to that has tended to be very pattern-based, and there are challenges with that because not all data is easily describable in patterns, and that's why people have started to look at artificial intelligence, machine learning for addressing some of these things. But if you're looking at data elements, you're still going to have challenges around the accuracy, false positives, and all of that. And then I mentioned sort of sensitive, knowing where your data is. So some of the things I'll talk about today and how we approach it that's a bit different is that we don't assume that you know where your data is. You don't have to survey your data owners for that locations of that data, and we do this on an ongoing basis. And there's some significant benefits to doing that. We also are not dependent on pure pattern matching systems. We leverage some of that. There's some good pattern matching, and some data is well formed. Think of credit cards or Social Security numbers, that kind of thing. But when you put that in context with other data, which is way less formed, like maybe health type records or other kinds of sentiment information, maybe cultural or religious affiliations and that kind of thing, gets much more difficult. So machine learning and artificial intelligence is really important. And then being able to identify places where that data may exist that you may not even know about, or as we know, the data moves around a lot these days. So being able to do that is important. So what I'll do here quickly is I'll run through how we do it. And then I'll go through it in a little more detail, and then we've got a little demo we can show you what it looks like in the interface. So the first thing that we do, we deploy as a container-based extensible infrastructure. But the first thing we typically do is look at network traffic, and we do this because we're trying to identify what network elements we are really interested in. The second thing that we do is we interrogate the traffic in that, interrogate the content of the traffic, and we identify potential sensitive information in that traffic. The third part of the process is we then scan that data in depth, and then we organize it around something we call a root data asset, which I'll talk about in a second. And then we manage and maintain that and identify copies of that data to be able to be leveraged across the various tools and processes you need to take advantage of the data. So let me walk through each of those pieces of the process in a little more detail to give you a little more visibility. So the first thing that we do, and this is an optional part of the process, is we look at network traffic, and we do this through looking at pure raw packets. We can do this at significant scale, and we identify repositories, databases, different kinds of vendors, source destination ports, and we manage and maintain an inventory that we use for then interrogating the data in depth. Again, this is not required, but it provides a real-time updated inventory that can automatically be discovered on the back end through our data at rest capabilities. So when somebody spins up a database that you don't know about or they haven't registered, or somebody has a database that's sitting on a server that should be deprecated but it hasn't been, we will identify those things and they can be scanned at rest. The second part of the process is where we identify sensitive data on the network. So if we see a file move to a file server, we see a SQL transaction through a database server, we can actually take the packets, we can reconstruct the packets, do entity extraction and data discovery on that data, and that provides additional context to how we pull all of this data together, which I'll describe in a minute or two. One of the questions I get here is, hey, a lot of our traffic is encrypted, or maybe, I get all of our traffic is encrypted. Typically, it's not all encrypted. In fact, that could be the most interesting parts of the traffic. We don't actually need to do this. This is additional context for the overview, but we can take feeds from SSL decryptors or from ICAP servers and so on. So there are other ways that we can get visibility into the network traffic if that's really important. The third part of the process here is really where the bulk of the work is done, and that's where we analyze as a client the data at rest repositories that we've identified, either through the network visibility or you can add these manually. And these are structured databases, unstructured databases, file systems, cloud repositories, cloud applications, really a whole variety of different sources where you may have data at rest just sitting there inert. I think we all know that most data actually is not traversing over the network most of the time. It's sitting in repositories and remains a risk that you need to know about. So this is where the bulk of the work is done. Again, we don't install agents. We connect as a client, and we typically will deploy our analytic engines close to the data. So, if you had a data center, you'd put an analytic engine, virtual analytic engine or a physical analytic engine close to it, or you might run it in a VPC if you had cloud repositories that you were discovering. The most important part of the process here is the next one, and that's where we take what we call a root data asset, but essentially what a root data asset is, it is a data asset that the organization has some level of confidence in and some context around. So for example, here, this could be a list of your VIP customers, for example. And all we really need from that list is something that makes each individual unique. So that could be first name, last name, email, or it could be a customer ID or social security number, anything that makes that individual unique. And what we do is we take that root data asset on an ongoing basis, any of the individual bits and pieces of data that we found, in this particular case, John Smith, we compare it with the known good data, the root data asset data, and we verify that sensitive data that we find as John Smith's data. And not only have we confirmed that it's John Smith's data, we know that John Smith is part of the VIP customer. So we have business context, we have verification and validation, and we can then leverage that data both from a compliance standpoint, from a risk management standpoint. We will then go on to the last part of the process, which is where we take John Smith's data and we identify and understand and catalog where all of the copies of that data exist across the enterprise. So this is quite useful if you think about it from a data subject access request perspective, but it also allows you to answer questions like, hey, do I have production data in a non-production environment, or do I have EU citizen data, for example, in non-EU data centers? Those kinds of questions, which are very difficult to do if you're looking at the data element perspective. But then if you aggregate these together into groups of individuals that you have relationships with or different regulatory and risk responsibilities around, provides you that context, and you can make those kinds of decisions. So that's it from an overview standpoint. Ryan, do you want to run the demo?
Absolutely, yeah. And thank you for well, first off, thank you to you and Jesse for presenting all that content, but also thank you for putting together the demo. So let me tee that up for you. This is a video that Rick had shared with us of the OneTouch platform in action.
So how does Inventa use a zero trust or minimal trust model for discovering and classifying sensitive information? Well, let's take a look. The first thing you'll need to understand is what you're looking for. From a business standpoint, this typically will come from some sort of compliance mandate or maybe a business policy requirement. Within Inventa, we have a set of definitions for personally identifiable information that come out of the box, and we can take a look at those here. What you'll notice here is there are a number of PII entity types. We've got 40 listed here. Things like account numbers and credit card numbers, driver's license numbers, address, city, state, that kind of thing. This is what ships out of the box. Additional entities can be added. You can add an entity if you are really facile with regex and you like to write patterns, or you've got some sort of pattern that set that you're used to. There's also a set of functions that you can leverage built in, or you can use dictionaries, some built-in dictionaries and custom dictionaries. This is the bits and pieces of sensitive information that Inventa will discover on the network, in data at rest, data in motion, structured data, unstructured data, and so on. The second piece of information here is what actually constitutes a unique individual. And when we find a piece of data and we have that piece of data, is this enough information to determine whether this person is in a unique record? So some of these things, all you need is a national ID, passport number, and so on. Other things, you need a couple of pieces of information in order to make sure that the record is unique. For instance, given name, certainly not unique, but given name and vehicle number is more likely to be unique. This is customizable for your environment and your data. So out of the box, we ship with the ability to discover sensitive information. So the next question is, where do you look for that data? OneTouch doesn't necessarily rely on customers telling us where the data resides. We actually will use network capture to identify locations where we see repositories that may look like that might have sensitive data in it. So what we do is we essentially build a dynamic CMDB. Here you can see a representation in the network map that shows the devices that we're seeing and the communication protocols between these devices. This allows us to pre-populate a repository listing, which can then be scanned for detailed discovery of the sensitive information elements that we looked at before. Now, what you'll see here is the repositories that have been set up. These have actually been scheduled, but the list would show here from the network map that we built. And then you can schedule the crawling here based on crawling times that you set up, or you can run it on demand. And you can also tag these repositories as being particularly sensitive or of a particular characteristic, like this may be a PCI repository, or maybe it's related to European data or some business unit. You can choose how you tag those repositories. So we have the repositories identified. That's the where we look, right? And we've done that without requiring much input from the customer or the business. And we've identified elements of data as it relates to personal sensitive information that we're looking for. And what that leads to is a set of PII candidates. And here's an example of PII candidates which we found. And what this means is we've identified sensitive information here, but we haven't been able to confirm that this sensitive information is an actual individual that we care about or we have any kind of relationship with as an organization. So this is a really key part of the process. The question there is, how do you know that that data is real? So the way OneTouch does it is we leverage root data assets, and these are assets that have been defined by the business as essentially known good copies of data. So we'll take a look at one of these here. This is from Salesforce. It's pulling a set of customer records out of Salesforce, and we can take a look at the mapping that we have here. We periodically will update this set of records, and we will use this set of records for validating the sensitive information that we found, the candidates that we've discovered, and confirming them into a group which we call data assets, which I'll take a look at in a second. So here is the mapping of the data that we've pulled back from Salesforce. There are a few initial records here for validating the data, and we've done a first pass map of column name to our OneTouch entity types here. So we've got middle name is mapped to middle name. We should probably, let's map this one full name here. So you can come in here and verify that these are correct mappings to the data that you're pulling back. Then what we do is we go to the data assets, which is in the data asset inventory. And these are the way the company sort of logically groups individuals that that they do business with. So this might be Brazilian customers, and again, that would go back to a root data asset that was specific to Brazilian customers. In particular, the root data asset we just looked at was Nevada customers. So if we take a look at this data asset, this is John and Jay Smiths from Nevada. And if you look at the root data assets, we're looking at that Salesforce root data asset we just looked at, as well as another data asset. You can have multiple root data assets here to aggregate to be one data asset. So if we take a look at these John and Jane Smiths, what we'll see is candidate PII that has been confirmed against the root data asset from Salesforce, and you get a set of data that has a very high confidence, and we then aggregate together this data, and we identify where all the copies of this particular data exists across all of the repositories that we are searching. So that is our way of confirming and validating each bit of data that we get against a known good copy of that data. So then the question is, how can you organize that data? Well, we organize it by data asset, which is shown here. So we've got some examples: PCI data, New York customer data, California customer data, and these may be valuable for different compliance reasons and handling in different kinds of ways. We also have the ability to look at the data from the repository view. So if you take a look at the repository view, you can see the different kinds of repositories here, and you can, slice and dice and select and filter down what you want to see. But a couple of items here of note. One is you've got candidates here. This is the elements of PII that we've discovered, but have not been able to confirm against a root data asset, against a data asset. And so there's still kind of hanging out there. Those are that's candidate PII. Whereas these here are confirmed PII. These are individuals. These are data subjects, which we've been able to validate the sensitive data that we found in this repository against a known good copy of data, right? And then that would be confirmed as managed PII. So we looked at it from a data asset perspective. We can look at it from a repository management perspective, which we took a look at there. And lastly, we can look at it from the individual perspective. So from a privacy perspective, you need to be able to identify where all of a data subject's data reside. So for example, John Smith requests all of his data. We can look John Smith up, and there's a number of different ways you can search for John Smith. But we can look at all the personal data that we've aggregated together across all of the different repositories and data in motion into a single record with the different values from the entities that we found, and then where all of that data resided. Where did we find all that data? In the files, what types of entities did we find in which files? And then if there were databases here, we would know what tables and what columns the databases contained John Smith's specific data. And then what data assets is John Smith a part of? He's part of the Nevada data asset. So you can look at it from the individual, you can look at it from the repository view, you can look at it from the data asset view. So the question then becomes, in a normal scenario when you do data discovery and classification, that's a sort of a one-time project. But what we do is we maintain this on an ongoing basis. And when we find new repositories, they can be added, new data appears, and we can notify you when sensitive data appears in places that perhaps it shouldn't be. So for example, if you've got a tagged repository that is PCI only, and you identify data that is outside of that tag, then we can notify you and let you know that, hey, there's PCI sensitive data outside of the PCI environment. You may want to do something about that. So the data is all accessible via an API, and typically our customers will leverage third-party tools, existing third-party tools for ticket management, risk management, response, and so on for leveraging this data from a sort of a data enrichment perspective around repositories that they're managing from a risk and compliance and privacy perspective. So I hope that gives you a good view into how OneTouch Inventa addresses data discovery and classification, and really takes a minimal trust view in how we do that process. Thank you.
All right, there we go. Again, thank you, Rick, for putting that demo together. Really appreciate that. I hope everyone obviously enjoyed the content there and seeing OneTouch in action. From here, I'm going to pass it back to Jesse. Jesse, if you want give a little bit of wrap up to the content here, and then we'll move into to the closing part of the presentation.
Absolutely, yeah, and that demo was great. There's a lot of good detail and a lot of kind of unique ways that OneTouch does what it does, especially compared to the overall market. And a lot of tools that, you point them and you shoot at a repository where they're doing it all in an automated fashion to alleviate some of the headache of the person having to be involved to do the scan, to understand the output. it's really amazing. So as was announced in May, is IBM Security has announced a strategic partnership with OneTouch, where we'll be reselling the solution as part of our broader portfolio. And if you see on the slide, our assess, protect, respond framework for where our various tools fit into an overall security, operating zero trust type of model, OneTouch is at the forefront of that. And what we mean by that is that really we want OneTouch's data and the level of information that it is discovering and understanding. We want that being passed to many of our security tools. So for instance, the first integration we have coming out with them later this month or early in August will be with our SOAR breach response tool, which is on this list of various products. And in that case, OneTouch, in case there's a breach, OneTouch will be passing what data was taken as part of a breach, so that a responder with a SOAR product or platform knows how to respond appropriately. For instance, if it's California data versus European data, those different CCPA and GDPR have their own sets of rules and requirements for who you notify when that data is taken. So knowing what data was taken will help you in your response. Similarly, the product right next to it in this picture, Guardium Insights, which is our next generation data security platform, will be taking OneTouch's data to enrich both alerts, anomalies, as well as helping a data security analyst prioritize which repository should I monitor. Those are just the first two that are coming out. There's many others that are planned, and you can see that it's an integral part of what we're doing from an IBM security, data security, and privacy standpoint. So with that, I would like to just kind of talk about the next steps and the call to action. So for one, request a demo, free trial. We want to get in front of customers. We want to really show you guys, the sandbox and the actions that you guys can take by getting your hands into the product. So that would mean reach out to me, Jesse Sedler at IBM.com, jesse.sedler at IBM.com. Similarly, we have a public-facing website with more content on OneTouch and IBM. So we encourage you to take a look. From there, you can also register to talk to an expert more about this. So really, we want to, come help solve some of these problems for you and your organization, and really show you the value of OneTouch.io and IBM Security and our partnership as we move forward along the zero trust journey together. With that, Ryan, I'll pass it back to you to wrap up.
Sure. Thanks, Jesse. And yes, on top of what Jesse mentioned with the free trial that we have available and learning more, we also have some other resources that you should see in the resources section of your attendee view, along with registration links for the other webinars in this Zero Trust series. So with that, I appreciate everyone hopping on here today. If you wanted to view this webinar again, or you feel there are other folks that may get some value out of the content covered today, please send them the registration link. It will link directly to the recording once this wraps, and you'll be able to view that in perpetuity to continue to refer back to some of what had been covered. So thank you everyone for joining, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks everybody.